Hello everybody and welcome to the second part and the final part of the Hackerrank SQL problem. In case you haven't watched the first part, please click here and I will link the first part for you. And yeah, enjoy the video. If you would like these free videos that I post for you in great detail, then please make sure to support the channel and grow the channel, like, subscribe and comment for any questions. And let's start with the video. In the first part, we have here the 4 columns and they are all correct except the second column where we count the hacker for each day. And to be able to count the hacker for each day, we're going to start a new query now. This one we're going to save here on the side. We're going to lead it later again. This is the part 1 query. We're going to have to change it a little bit here on this column where it is not right. And we are going to develop the query now for the second column. So what we have to know here are 3 concepts that we are going to introduce for this in order to achieve this. We're going to use a table variable, we're going to use variables, and we are going to use the while loop. So the variables, I'm sure you heard of them before, like they are just like an empty shelf where you can save, for example, a number or a date. And the table variable, it's the same thing, just that it's not just for one number, but for a whole table. And in that way you can save a whole table. You don't have to create a new table for it. You can just save it in a variable if you just need it temporarily now for this query as we are doing. So it is the syntax is a little bit to get used to, but in basic concept is not so complicated. So I already have this tab here open where it explains about the table variable in SQL check. Both with variables and with table variables, we have to declare them before we can use them. And we are declaring now a table variable. I'm going to use this as a template. So this is my table variable. So what table variable do we want? We want the hackers. Yes, we want to have the, let's call them consistent hackers. So we want the hackers that they really submitted each day. We want to have them in this table and we want to count them for all 15 days. So that's why we call them consistent hackers. They consistently submitted their submission every day. And we want the hacker ID. We just call it hacker ID as in the other table too. And what's the data type for this hacker ID? It's integer data type. And then we also want to save the submission date. We want to know on which submission date this hacker ID was still in the race. So on which submission date, not submission ID, submission date, this hacker was still submitting consistently. So okay, so now we have the table variable, consistent hackers. And we're also going to need normal variables in this one. And we also have to declare them. We have to need a variable for submission date because we have to go through 15 submission dates here from 1st of March until 15th of March. And we don't want to write like 15 queries in order to solve that. We would like to iterate through a variable that is the submission date, and we are just counting the submission date higher for the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd March, and so on. So we declare the subdate. I call the submission date variable subdate. And which data type should it be? It's a date data type. As in the table variable, it was also a date data type. It's a submission date. And now we need another date variable, and it is called remaining date. So in the remaining date variable, we are going to need that for a join so that we can look in the hackers table, in the consistent hackers, who is actually still remaining at this point of time that in the consistent hackers table. So let's do that first for the first day, like the 1st March 2016. And therefore we want to insert all the hackers that are still in the race in the 1st of March into the consistent hackers table. So we make an insert into in the consistent hackers table. And what do we want to insert? We want to insert the hacker ID and the submission date from submissions, from the submissions table. From which date? Where submission date like 2016 1st of March 2016. Okay, and then just to check it, we print it out, select star from consistent. So now we can use the hacker table variable, and we can actually print it out just like a normal table in the end. Select star from, you would also write just submissions, but now you just write add consistent hackers. Both the variable and the table variable always need an add in the syntax in MS SQL before you write them. And now let's run this code. Might be that the semicolon was missing. Okay, so we wrote form and not, we have to write from. Okay, so now what you can see is that we queried now the consistent hackers table variable, and you can see here the hacker ID and the date from submissions, where submission date like 2016-3/1. Okay, so we have all the hackers that they are still in the race in the 1st of March. So if we would now count the distinct values of these hacker IDs, we would get for the 1st of March already the right number. Now we also have to make the table for the 2nd of March, for the 3rd of March, and so on until the 15th of March. We want to put all the hacker IDs in that table and only as many as they are still remaining at each day. So that's why are these only the consistent hackers in this table. Okay, so now we did for the 1st of March. Now let's do for the next days also. For that we need a while loop. And how is the while loop working? How is the syntax working? Well, a while loop you need if you just want to iterate over, for example, a table. And the syntax is like that you need a condition. Until when do you want to iterate? So we say while subdate smaller than 2016-3/15, because this is the last date that we want to iterate over. 15 days of learning SQL, and it is until March 15, 2016. So now we also have to initialize while subdate smaller 2016-3/15, and now I think it comes begin. Let's look at the syntax. Yes, we now need a begin and an end. Okay, and that is basically the syntax for the while. Now it's very important in the while loop that you will change your variables in the while loop, so you have to iterate over them. So we actually, in this variables, submission date, that we want to use them now, subdate and remaining date, but we didn't initialize them at all. So what does it mean to initialize a variable? First we declared it, that we did here in line 8 and 9, declare subdate date, and 9 declare remaining date date. So now we need to initialize it, and that we are going to do it like this: set subdate equals, so the first value should be 2016-3/1, the 1st of March, the submission date is the first value, and then set, actually we should initialize them outside of the while loop, because we don't want to initialize that every time again when the while loop is running. We want to initialize it just one time, so we have to do it outside of the loop, so it's not going to run again and again and again. So set subdate equal to 2016-31. That is initialization of the subdate. Now we need to initialize the remaining date. Set remaining date equal to 2016-31. Okay, so now we initialized both of our variables. So how do we begin? While subdate smaller 2016-315. So for the 1st of March, we already have our consistent hackers written into our table variable, so we don't need that anymore. So now we start at the 2nd of March with a submission date, with a subdate. How do we add now one day to it? Because we want to iterate, we want to go from 1st of March subdate to 2nd of March subdate. And we can do that with date add from date add function. Just will give, you can add a day, a month or a year. Now we want to add a day. How many days we want to add? 1. To what do we want to add the date? Subdate. So, and the semicolon is now, and that is called manipulating the variable. So first we declared it, then we initialized the variable, and now we manipulated it to give it another day. And now let's insert again into consistent hackers. Insert into consistent hackers, because this table variable we created so that we insert all the consistent hackers into it. We did it for the first day, and now we are using this while loop to do it for the second until the last day from the 15 days. So now we insert into consistent hackers. What do we want to insert? Well, we want to select the hacker ID and the submission date. From what do we want to insert that? From submissions. And we call it S here because we're going to do a join again. S.HackerID, S.SubmissionDate. Where submissions like the variable subdate. Oh, by the way, we have to say who should get the date at from day 1 subdate. So the variable subdate should get this date at. So subdate equals date at, and then you make the function day 1 and subdate. So we insert into the consistent hackers. We select the hacker ID and the submission date to insert them into consistent hackers from the submissions table, where submissions like subdate. What is subdate now? Subdate is the 1st of March plus 1 day, so the 2nd of March right now. So now we would insert all the hackers IDs and the submission date, which will always be 2nd of March, as this is the Where-Bedingung, 2nd of March. Insert them all into our table variable. But we don't want everyone from 2nd of March. We only want the hackers from 2nd of March, as you remember, that they are consistently submitting. What does it mean consistently? Each day. They have to submit each day. So now that we are in the 2nd day, how can we make sure that the hackers from the 1st day are also submitted into this 2nd day? For that, we have to make an intersection, a join. With what do we want to join? We want to join with the consistent hackers table, where we already write who consistently updated until now. So we join with consistent hackers. Let's say ch. On what do we want to join? ch.hacker ID. We want to join on the hacker ID because that's what we want, the hackers that they submitted every day. Equals s.hacker ID, and another condition. The other condition is submission date should be like remaining date. Remaining date. So remaining date means the people, the hackers that are still remaining in that date. And the date is now 1st of March 2016. So we are asking from the submissions table, where the submissions are like the 2nd of March, and we are joining with our consistent hackers table. And the consistent hackers table has on the remaining date, which is the 1st of March now, saved which hackers are still remaining in the 1st of March. So we make this intersection, and that's how we get all the remaining hackers. Okay, so we do have the intersection now, we have the join, and now we have to iterate also through the remaining date. So we have to do the same again here. Remaining date should also get one more. Remaining date. So how it's going to look at the 3rd of March then? So let's try to think through that one now. So we put the remaining date one more. So we put it from 1st of March to 2nd of March. So let's imagine now we are starting at the beginning again at the while loop. Okay, so the subdate we are adding one more. So then we are at the 3rd of March instead of the 2nd of March. So we are asking all the hackers from the 3rd of March, where submissions like subdate, so subdate is 3rd of March now. And we are joining with the consistent hackers from the 2nd day, from the remaining date. The remaining date is now the 2nd of March. So because this table we are inserting always the intersection between the current day and the ones before the current day, that they are always saved in the hackers, in the consistent hackers table, we are always getting the consistent right number out for every day, and we can always put this in this consistent hackers table. So in the end, let's select star from consistent hackers to see if everything worked right. Okay, so actually we have to set subdate, and we have to set the remaining date, as we did before also. And we also have to say s.submissions, s.submission date, actually, not submissions. Line 32, ambiguous column name, and ch.submission date. Okay, so now we have the results, and this looks like it worked. So we put in the consistent hackers table, we put all the hackers that they are still remaining in the 1st March, in the 2nd March, in the 3rd March, and so on. So now, of course, we don't want all the hackers in the output, but what do we actually want? We can look at the task. We want the number that is submitted each day, who made at least one submission each day. We have to count the unique, so distinct hackers, unique, who made at least one submission each day. Okay, so for that we need another table variable. I'm gonna declare it here, declare count hackers table. So what's this gonna have? It's gonna have hacker ID as an integer, same actually as the other table variable, and submission date as a date. So when do we use it? We go after the while loop. We're gonna do insert into this new table variable, which is called count hackers. And what are we going to insert into it? We are going to select the count, and now comes the count from distinct, which we actually want to do in this task, from hacker ID. And the second should be the submission date. So we just write submission date from which? From this consistent hackers table, right? From consistent hackers table. So add consistent hackers. And also we have to group by, because we're having an aggregate function here, group by submission date. So now let's test it, and we're doing select star from not consistent hackers, we already tested that, but count hackers, the new one. So let's see how this is working out. Okay, so he did something, and we can see that every day it got less. So 112 we had in the beginning, the distinct hackers who made a submission each day. And then, of course, as the days progress, then people are falling out, they don't make a submission, and they don't get counted again. And we're going down, 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 down until 35 here. In these days, they all did the submission 35 until the end, from 7th of March to 15th of March. Okay, so it looks like it could be the right solution. Looks promising. So what do we do in the end here? We actually don't want to select this one, but we want to select from the first part, which we already figured out, which I saved here from my other video. And now the second column, this was the one that was not correct now. So we call it here ch dot hacker ID. We want to get the ch dot hacker ID, and why ch? Because it's from the count hackers variable. So now we still have to join this count hackers variable. And join count at count hackers ch on ch dot submission date, because they have the same number of submission dates and they have one submission date that is exactly matching the submission date in submissions. ch dot submission date equals s dot submission date. And because, do we have an aggregate here? We don't need an aggregate anymore, because we already have it as a hacker ID, so we can put the group by aside. And let's run this code now. Okay, looks like it is about the right result, but we have way too many rows. So we still need the group by, even though we are not making the aggregate count here. We still need the group by clause. And we have to group by the submission date. We don't want all these rows, all these submission date rows that we get from the join that we made here. So we need to group by the submission date, group by the hacker ID, group by the name, and also group by ch dot hacker ID. So let's see if it works. And there you go. We now solved the hardest problem on Hackerrank SQL, 15 days of learning SQL. So this was quite a tricky problem. As you can see, the query got pretty long in the end. And especially at the part where we are joining the consistent hackers table, it is complicated to understand. So please feel free to comment, of course, like and subscribe the video if you want to see more of that, but also comment if you have any questions over it. I would love to go into more details or maybe present it from a different light so you can understand more and get more value out of this video. So thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.